Well, thank you very much, and it's a huge pleasure to be with you this morning and to kick off this day of talks and to discuss shifting perspectives. Now, you've already heard a little bit about me. I suppose my perspective has shifted. I was once a Conservative Party MP and then I ceased to be. I was once a Member of Parliament and now I've ceased to be. But what I want to talk today about is the sort of shifting politics in the UK and also elsewhere, and how that has changed pretty dramatically over recent years and how that may continue to change. I have to say it's not all good news, at least from my perspective, but I want to sort of set that out and explain how and why I think that has changed. So I want to go back a few years, probably before most of you can remember much about politics, at a time where largely the electorate in the UK, but I think you could look at this analysis and apply it around the Western world, the electorate tended to vote on economic grounds, broadly. Not in every case, but it was essentially about economic security. And those who had greater amounts of economic security tended to vote for centre-right parties. Those who were poorer tended to vote for centre-left parties. And in the UK, this meant that by and large, the centre-right party, the Conservative Party, was the dominant party. They won more elections than not, because they tended to attract the support of the middle classes, but they also attracted elements of the working class vote, on the grounds that the Conservatives were seen as the low-risk party, that they were less ideological, they were more pragmatic, they were seen as being more competent. Whether that was deserved or not, we can debate, but that was how the Conservatives tended to be the dominant party in British politics. But something started, well, I should also explain what it was that made the Conservatives so successful, and what was, if you like, their ideological position. And the Conservatives at that point were seen as I say, more pragmatic, but also they believed in institutions. They were generally sort of outward-looking, moderate by temperament, pro-business, and essentially had a message that the economy was safer in the hands of the Conservatives than in the Labour Party. Again, points that you could debate. There are lots of people who would argue that it wasn't true, but that was essentially the pitch that the Conservatives offered. Now, things started to change, not just in the UK, but around the Western world, when politics started moving away from the politics of economics and economic ideas towards more cultural issues. So in particular, with the fall of the Berlin Wall, with the sense that socialism as an economic project had been discredited, had run out of steam, the left in politics increasingly moved towards cultural issues, protecting in particular minority rights, whether that be ethnic minorities, whether that be the position of women or sexual minorities or whatever it might be. That became a higher priority for the left and was perceived as a higher priority for the left than previously had been the case. Now, the difficulty here for the left and the opportunity for the right is that a lot of the traditional voters for centre-left parties were very socially conservative, but they were, by and large, economically insecure, they were poorer, they were very often involved in trade unions. They were part of big industrial organizations, and that built a certain amount of class solidarity, and class solidarity resulted in them voting for the Labour Party. What then started to happen gradually, and then it accelerated, was the sense that if politics was now about culture, in particular, the white working class were very often much more socially conservative than the party they were voting for, and over time they drifted away from the Labour Party. And the big moment in British political history where I think that really was accelerated, I think the trend was happening already, but it really was accelerated, was Brexit. And Brexit, which was in truth a big argument about immigration and about how internationalist we are. Not all Brexiteers, by the way, are anti-immigration, and not all Brexiteers are isolationist by instinct, but the Brexit vote was an isolationist, anti-immigration vote, pretty overwhelmingly. Yes, it was take back control, but it was take back control over immigration policy specifically. And that shift, that moment, forced a lot of people to change their position. And if you look at how the Brexit vote fell, the support came overwhelmingly not on the basis of where you were on economic security. There were rich and poor who voted for Brexit. It was much more your attitude towards cultural diversity. And that was a really important moment. That also provided a very big opportunity for the Conservative Party to suddenly pick up a whole new swathe of voters. Now, some of us, as you have heard, I ended up losing the Conservative whip because of my position on a no-deal Brexit. Some of us opposed this strategy, but it did create an opportunity in 2019 for the Conservative Party to win a whole new set of voters and a whole new set of seats in what's described as the Red Wall. Generally industrial or post-industrial towns in the Midlands and the north of England and North Wales, who were suddenly prepared to vote Conservative in a way that they had never done before, because suddenly the politics were on culture, not on economics. There had been a shift in the perspectives of large numbers of voters. And at that point, it kind of looked as if the Conservatives could be a dominant force in British politics, because they had largely kept hold of their old supporters who were very frightened about Jeremy Corbyn, didn't want Jeremy Corbyn to become Prime Minister, but also now very attracted to, there were now these new voters who were very attracted to the Conservative Party because they'd get Brexit done and they would do lots of things that were popular with them. Now, there were some real problems with that in the longer term, and we're starting to see that play out now. So some of the issues that result from this sort of realignment of British politics and the stresses and strains that it then puts on the Conservative Party, I think, are quite apparent. For a start, you end up with little or no economic coherence because you're appealing to voters who want lower taxes, because you're appealing to the traditional, more prosperous Conservative voters who don't want to pay more in tax, but you're also appealing to working class voters who want higher public spending on the NHS and on police and so on. So your fiscal policy starts to become a mess. Are you putting up taxes? Are you bringing down taxes? This government has done both over the course of the last 4 years. Then you've also got the issue that, in fact, the type of politicians who are prepared to run these arguments and be more populist tend to be, if I can generalize, kind of less competent, because they're working for short-term outcomes. They're trying to appeal in the short-term interests of voters. They've got a difficult coalition, a broad coalition of voters who don't necessarily agree the same thing. And sometimes you end up saying some pretty sort of outrageous things. It's hard to have a kind of coherent worldview, and if you don't have politicians with a coherent worldview, they're not terribly likely to be competent, and I think you'd result in not governing terribly well. I think the third issue is that very often the type of political leader who works best in these circumstances, if I can put it politely, tends to be a bit of a rogue. And the most effective politician in terms of trying to sort of unite this disparate coalition together has been Boris Johnson. But when you have someone like Boris Johnson, you will have difficulties in terms of rule breaking and what have you. And then the next issue, I think, is you've got one of the aspects of the kind of more populist approach, which is what people are after, is that you end up attacking institutions. So things like the judiciary have been attacked, the civil service gets attacked, the BBC gets attacked, and that a lot of those institutions become much more vulnerable, and you end up with a more divided politics. And also, this is the point about cultural arguments as opposed to economic arguments, is that it's a zero-sum game. One side is winning, another side is losing. There's no way in which you can kind of come together and find a way of growing the economy. It's all very contested, it all tends to be very bitter, and it makes politics much more polarized than it otherwise would be, and I think we have ended up with more polarized politics as a consequence of all of this. And we've now got to the position where, because of all these factors, because of issues over a lack of clear economic vision, the fact that government hasn't necessarily been as competent as it might do, that institutions have been attacked, that ethical standards are perceived as being pretty low, that the Conservative Party, having gone from its best results in 2019 since 1987, and the Labour Party getting its worst result since 1935, we are heading towards a general election where the Conservatives might be getting their worst result since, who knows, 1997, maybe even 1832, and the Labour Party possibly heading for their best result ever. And we have a more volatile electorate, and that's partly because of the shifting perspectives of that volatile electorate, that they focused once on economics, now on culture, now perhaps on economics as we go through a difficult period, and the lack of coherence on the centre-right of politics is proving to be a real problem. Now, what's striking about all of this is it's not just happening in the United Kingdom. The same dynamic has happened in pretty well every Western country. Look at Donald Trump in the US. The Republicans have moved from being the party that they once were, of the establishment, of the prosperous, of the businesses, to becoming a much more culturally based organisation, winning over in, if you like, Rust Belt areas, states where there's high levels of unemployment, like Pennsylvania and Michigan and Wisconsin. Those are becoming, those were all voted for Donald Trump in 2016, even though traditionally they had voted for Democrats in the past. We've got first past the post in this country, just as the Americans have. In other countries, what we're seeing is the rise of populist parties that are just purely populist parties. So you've got them in France, in Germany, pretty well every European country. In the Netherlands, Geert Wilders topped the poll. And that is a shift. And I think what I would say in terms of what is happening to politics around the world is that it has become more volatile, that populism has become a stronger, more powerful message. It is being driven by, if you like, a reaction to cultural change. A lot of cultural changes which I, for one, would welcome, but there is a pushback on a lot of what has happened. And that has resulted in the rise of right-wing populism. I think in the end, populism will fail. In the end, its message is negative. It can't deliver good government. It isn't going to be successful, it isn't going to fulfill the promises that it makes. But we should all be aware that populism is on the rise. And for those of us who believe in a different type of politics, it is important to be engaged, to understand what is driving that populism, but to try to isolate it and ensure that we can have the type of politics and the type of government that can deliver security, prosperity, and a less divided and polarized nation. Thank you very much.